You are watching Smile and Scars, the place where real stories, powerful moments, and unexpected twists come to life. Today's story begins in a small American town, inside a quiet diner where nothing dramatic was meant to happen. Until a few arrogant young men made the biggest mistake of their lives. It was early morning, the kind of slow, peaceful morning where the sun comes in through dusty windows and the smell of fresh coffee fills the air. The diner wasn't crowded, just a handful of locals, a waitress cleaning tables, and an elderly man sitting alone in the corner booth. He wore an old military jacket, the patches faded, the edges worn, and the fabric carrying the weight of memories. His hair was gray, short, neatly kept, and he had a calm, steady look in his eyes. Most people just assumed he was another quiet old veteran, someone who'd seen life, fought battles, and simply wanted a warm breakfast. No one knew his name, no one knew his past, and no one knew who his son was. But they were about to find out. The old man, Mr. Norris, sat with a cup of coffee in front of him. He wasn't in a hurry. He was enjoying the peacefulness that only a retired veteran truly appreciates. He had lived through storms, wars, and things most people today couldn't imagine. Nothing in this diner could intimidate him. At least that's what he thought. The bell above the diner door jingled violently as 3 young men walked in. Loud, cocky, and already causing trouble before they even took a seat. They were the kind of guys who walked with their chests puffed out, looking for attention, believing the world revolved around them. The waitress sighed quietly. She already knew the type. "Morning, boys," she said politely. Yeah, one of them replied, snapping his fingers as if she were his servant. "Get us coffee." The other 2 laughed. The older man looked up from his cup, not because he wanted trouble, but because disrespect was something he never tolerated. Not in his time, not now. The boys noticed. "What you looking at, old man?" the tallest one snapped. Mr. Norris didn't respond. He simply continued drinking his coffee. Silence was his strength, and experience had taught him that fools create their own problems without any help. But the disrespect only encouraged them. The tallest guy pulled out a chair, scraping it loudly across the floor, then sat at the table right next to the veteran. His friends followed, leaning back in their seats, legs stretched out arrogantly. "You hear me, Grandpa," the leader said. "I asked you a question." Still, the old man said nothing. Not because he was afraid, but because he had learned long ago that your reaction is your power. His silence irritated them. "Look at this guy." One of the boys laughed. "Probably can't even hear us with those ancient ears." The boys burst into laughter. The waitress brought their coffees, but the leader smirked and pointed at the old man's cup. "That coffee looks better. Switch it." "She froze, sir. This one is his." "I said switch it." He barked. Mr. Norris finally looked up, his eyes steady, calm, and unshaken. The boys were shocked by the way he stared. Not in fear, not in anger, but with the unbreakable confidence of someone who had survived worse than their childish arrogance. "It's fine," he said quietly. "Let them have what they want." The waitress didn't like it, but she nodded and set the veteran's cup in front of the young men. They laughed as if they had won something significant. But the old man wasn't bothered. He simply asked the waitress for another cup, thanked her gently, and went back to his quiet morning. That made the boys laugh harder. "Oh my God, he's so old and weak he just gave up," one of them yelled. Customers glanced around uncomfortably, but no one interfered. No one wanted to get involved. Then the leader leaned forward, eyes full of cruelty. "Where'd you get that jacket?" His voice dripped with mockery. "You steal it from a real soldier." The diner fell silent. The old man's fingers paused around the handle of his cup. That jacket was from his years of service, from battles that had taken friends, brothers, and pieces of himself. He slowly turned toward the boys. "I earned it," he said softly, "with men braver and stronger than you." The boys laughed again. "Yeah, right." One of them mocked. "Sure, Grandpa fought in a war." Another added, "Dude, he probably passed out in the middle of training." Their laughter grew louder, crueler, and more people in the diner began to look uncomfortable. One old man nearby whispered, "They have no idea who they're mocking." But the boys weren't done. The leader grabbed the sleeve of the veteran's jacket. "Take this off," he ordered. "You don't deserve to wear it." The entire diner froze. The old man's jaw tightened. His calm demeanor remained, but his eyes, those deep, experienced, battle-hardened eyes, shifted. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't angry. He was disappointed. "I wore this in places you couldn't survive for a minute." He said quietly, "Show some respect." But respect was something these boys didn't understand. The leader suddenly slapped the table, causing the dishes to clatter. "You think you can talk to me like that, old man?" The veteran didn't flinch. "You boys should walk away," he replied, "before you regret staying." A murmur swept through the diner. Some people recognized the tone in his voice. Others simply felt something shift in the atmosphere. But the boys only got louder. "What are you gonna do, Grandpa? Yeah, scare us with your cane. You're so old you might break your back just standing up." One of the boys lifted the old man's half-finished coffee and poured it onto the table, letting the liquid drip toward the veteran. The diner gasped. The old man stared at the spilling coffee for a long moment. Then, slowly, he stood up. His movements were calm, controlled, steady, not like a fragile old man, but like someone who knew exactly what he was capable of. The boys stood too, but not because they were ready. Because something in the air told them they should be. "You boys," the veteran said quietly, "are making a mistake." The leader smirked. "You gonna stop us?" The veteran simply sighed. "My son would have handled this differently," he said softly, "but I am not him." "Your son?" the leader mocked. "What's he gonna do? Call the cops? Cry to his mommy?" A customer across the diner whispered under his breath, "His son is Chuck Norris." Before anyone could react, the leader shoved the old man. He didn't budge. The boys exchanged confused glances. Then the leader shoved him harder. The veteran stepped back half a step, then straightened. The leader growled, "That's it. I'm done with this, old." He drew his fist back to punch. And at that exact moment, the diner door opened, everyone turned, and what they saw made the entire room fall silent. Chuck Norris walked in. The diner sat in an uneasy hush after the old man, Henry Norris, father of Chuck Norris, finished speaking. His voice had been steady, but the truth inside it shook everyone to the core. The bullies who had mocked him earlier stood frozen near their table, their bravado now leaking out of them like air from a punctured tire. The customers watched quietly, unsure what would happen next. Some were ashamed they hadn't stepped in sooner. Others were frightened, knowing that humiliation can turn cowards into something more dangerous. Henry picked up his coffee cup with both hands. His fingers trembled. Not because of fear, but because age had long since claimed the steadiness of his youth. He sipped and exhaled softly, almost like he was relieved to finally tell a story he hadn't spoken of in years. But the moment of calm didn't last. Mac, the leader of the bullies, clenched his jaw. He wasn't used to being shown up, especially not in front of an entire diner. His friends looked at him, waiting. And like most insecure men, he reacted the only way he knew how, by doubling down on stupidity. He stepped toward Henry's booth, slamming his hand down on the table so hard the coffee cup rattled. "You think that little story scares me," Mac growled, bending close. "You think I care who your son is? Chuck Norris or not, you're just an old man, and old men need to learn when to stay quiet." The diner gasped. A few people stood up. Someone whispered, "Don't do this, not now." Henry looked up at Mac with a calmness that didn't make sense. There was no fear in his eyes, not even a flicker, just a strange mix of disappointment and pity. "Son, you're making a mistake," that's what Henry thought, but he didn't get to say it, because Mac grabbed the old man's shirt collar and yanked him up from the seat. Trays clattered. A waitress screamed. Henry's cane fell to the floor with a sharp, hollow crack. Mac's friends moved in, circling the booth like vultures. Henry's breath hitched, but he didn't fight. He didn't struggle. He kept his calm because he knew something none of them did. Help was already on the way. Henry Norris had triggered it earlier, quietly, discreetly, by pressing a tiny button inside his pocket. It wasn't a panic button for police, it wasn't for an ambulance, it was a signal for one person, his son. Mac shoved Henry back against the booth and snarled, "Say something now, old man. Tell us another funny story." Henry stared at him, sadness filling his eyes. "I don't want to hurt you boys," he said softly. The diner froze. Mac blinked, then burst into laughter. "Hurt us? You can barely stand." But before he could continue, before any of his friends could throw another insult, before another customer could intervene, the diner door opened. Hard, it didn't just swing. It slammed against the wall with a crash that made the windows vibrate. And in walked a man everyone recognized, Chuck Norris. He didn't need an introduction. He didn't need a dramatic line. He didn't even need to speak. The moment he stepped inside, the air in the room changed. It felt heavier, sharper, controlled. His eyes scanned the room in a single sweep. He saw his father. He saw Mac's hand on Henry's collar. And then his expression changed from calm to deadly. The entire diner went silent. Even the sizzling grill seemed to pause. Chuck walked forward with slow, deliberate steps, not rushing, not shouting. Just moving with that unmistakable command that made every bully rethink their choices. "Let go of my father," Chuck said quietly. It wasn't loud, but it echoed through the diner like a thunderclap. Mac froze. His friends backed away without meaning to. Their bodies reacted before their brains did. Mac swallowed hard. We were just talking." Chuck took another step. "I heard enough from the doorway." Henry lifted a hand weakly. "Chuck, don't." But Chuck's voice softened only for him. "Dad, sit. You shouldn't be standing." Chuck placed a steadying hand under Henry's arm and eased him back into the booth. There was a tenderness there that made half the diner tear up. A son protecting the man who once protected him. Then Chuck turned back to the bullies and the tenderness vanished. "What you did," Chuck said slowly, "wasn't just disrespectful, it was cruel. My father earned every year on his face, every scar, every wrinkle. He survived things you can't even imagine, and you thought you could mock him." Mac stammered, We didn't know he was your dad." Chuck's eyes hardened. "You shouldn't have needed to know." The words cut deeper than any punch, but unfortunately for Mac, Chuck Norris wasn't finished. "You put your hands on him," Chuck said, "so now you'll remove them." Mac stared, confused. "Remove? What?" Then Chuck stepped forward so fast the air seemed to snap. He grabbed Mac's wrist, not painfully, not violently, just firmly, and pulled it away from Henry's collar. "Now," Chuck said, "apologize." Mac blinked. His pride tried to fight back, but fear crushed it instantly. I'm sorry, sir." Chuck narrowed his eyes, "Not to me." Mac turned to Henry, shaking. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have touched you. I shouldn't have said anything." Henry gave a soft nod. "I forgive you, son, but learn from this." Chuck turned to Mac's friends. "All of you apologize." One by one, they muttered apologies, some trembling, some nearly whispering. Henry accepted each with the quiet dignity of a man who had weathered storms far worse. But then Chuck noticed something. The waitress who had been shoved earlier, her eyes were still red from fear. A tray lay broken by her feet. Chuck turned to the bullies again. "And you're going to fix what you broke." Mac swallowed. "We will. You're going to pay for everyone's meal." "We will. And you're going to leave this diner with enough respect to never behave this way again." Mac nodded frantically. Yes, we will." Chuck stepped aside. "Go." The bullies didn't walk out. They stumbled. They nearly tripped over each other, racing to the counter, throwing cash on the register, and rushing outside. The moment the door closed behind them, the diner exhaled collectively. Someone clapped, then another, then the entire diner erupted in applause. Chuck gave a humble nod, then sat beside his father. The waitress brought fresh coffee, hands still shaky but grateful. Henry looked at his son with a small smile. "I had it under control, you know." Chuck raised an eyebrow. "Dad, the last time you had something under control, you climbed a mountain in the rain because you said the view would be worth the risk." Henry chuckled softly. And it was. A comfortable silence settled between them. The danger was gone, the fear had passed, and all that remained was warmth. Then respect. The diner owner came over, wiping his hands on his apron. "Sir, thank you for what you did." Chuck shook his head. "No, thank you for looking out for him." A few customers approached to shake Henry's hand, thanking him for his service, for his courage, for being a living reminder of a generation built from something stronger. And Henry absorbed each word with humility, because he had never bragged about his past, he had simply lived it. Later, as they left the diner, Chuck tucked his father's hand under his arm to steady him. The sun was setting behind them, casting long shadows across the parking lot. "You know," Henry said, "you didn't have to come rushing in like that." Chuck smiled. "Dad, you're the man who taught me to stand up for others. It's only right I stand up for you." Henry nodded slowly. "Then I think your mother would be proud." They walked to their truck quietly, peacefully, because justice had been served, respect had been restored, and a group of bullies had learned a lesson they'd never forget. Never underestimate an elderly veteran, especially one who raised Chuck Norris.